guys, it's me, Kanika, as you might already know, and today I'm going to be reading the second video of the series for a single shard. In this video, I'm going to be reading chapter 2 of this book. Let's begin. Tree Ear peered between the leaves of the Polowina tree, puzzled. Several days had passed since his last visit to Min's house, and he had calculated that it was time for another thrilling day. But there was no sign of Min at his work, nor any wet clay on the wheel. The workshop was tidy, with few chickens in the yard, the only signs of life. Emboldened by silence, Tree Ear emerged from his hiding place and approached the house. Against the wall was a set of shelves holding a few unveiled last creations. They were at the stage the potters called leather hard, dried by the air, but not yet glazed or fired. Unglazed, the work was a little interest of thieves. The finished pieces were surely locked up somewhere in the house. Tree Ear paused at the edge of the brush and listened hard one more time. A hen clucked proudly, and Tree Ear grinned. Min would have an egg for his supper, but there was still no signs of the potter, so Tree Ear tiptoed to the last few steps of the stand before the shelf. For the last time, he was seeing Min's work at close range. There was a duck that would have fit in the palm of his hand with a tiny hole in its bill. Tree Ear had seen such a duck in use before. A painter had been sitting on the riverbank working on a water scene. The painter had poured water from a duck's bill onto a stone on a single drop at a time, mixing ink to exactly the correct consistency for his work. Tree Ear stared at Min's duck. Though it was now a dull gray, so detailed were its features that he found himself half listening for the sound of a quack. Min had shaped and then carved the clay to form of wing and tail. Even the little tail curled up with an impudence that made Tree Ear smile. He tore his gaze away from the duck to examine the next piece, a tall jug with ribbed lines that imitated the shape of a melon. The lines were so perfectly symmetrical, curving so gracefully from top to bottom that Tree Ear longed to run his fingers along the smooth, shallow grooves. The melon's stem and leaves were cleverly shaped to form the lid of the jug. The last piece on the shelf was the least interesting. A rectangular littered box as large as his two hands. It was completely undecorated. Disappointed in its plainness, Tree Ear was ready to turn away when a thought struck him. Outside the box was plain, but perhaps inside. Holding his breath, he reached out, gently lifted the lid, and looked inside. He grinned in double delight as his own correct guess and at Min's skill. The plain box held 5 smaller boxes, a small round one in the center, and 4 curved boxes that fit around it perfectly. The small boxes appeared to completely fill the larger container, but Min had left exactly the right amount of space to allow any of them to be lifted out. Tree Ear put the lid of the large box down on the shelf and picked up one of the curved containers. On the underside of its lid was a lip of clay that held the lid in place. Tree Ear's eyes flickered back and forth between the small pieces in his hand and the larger container. His brow furrowed in thought. How did Min fit them together so perfectly? Perhaps he made the large box and a second one to fit inside and cut smaller boxes from that? Or did he make an inside box first and fit the larger box around it? Maybe he began with the small central box, then curved ones, then someone shouted. The chicken squawked noisily, and the Tree Ear dropped what he was holding. He stood there paralyzed for a moment, then threw his hands up in front of his face to protect himself from the blows that were down on his head and shoulders. It was the old potter. Thief! He screamed. How dare you come here? How dare you touch my work? Tree Ear did the only thing he could think of. He dropped to his knees and covered in a deep formal bow. Please, please, honorable sir, I was not stealing your work. I came only to admire it. Min's cane halted in mid-blow. The potter stood over the boy with the cane still poised for another shake. Have you been here before, beggar boy? Treat-ear's thoughts scrambled for his shooting. The truth seemed the easiest. Yes, honorable sir, I come often to watch your work. Ah! Treat-ear was still doubled over in his bow, but out of the corner of his eye he could see the tip of the cane as it was lowered to the ground. He allowed himself a single sigh of relief. So it is you who breaks the twigs and bruises the leaves of the low-hanging tree just beyond. Treat-ear nodded, feeling his face flush. He had thought he was covering his tracks well. Not to steal, you say? How do I know you do not watch just to see when I have made something of extra value? Now Treat-ear raised his head and looked at Min. He kept his voice respectful, but his words were proud. I would not steal. Stealing and begging make a man no better than a dog. The potter stared at Boy for a long moment. At last, Min seemed to make up his mind about something, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost the sharpest edge of its English. So you were not stealing? It is the same thing to me. With one part damaged, the rest is of no use. He gestured at the misshapen pottery box on the ground, badly dented from its fall. Get on your way, then. I know better than to ask for payment for what you have ruined. Treat-ear stood slowly, shame hot in his breast. It was true. He could never hope to pay Min for the damaged box. Min picked it up and tossed it on the rubbish heap at the side of the yard. He continued to mutter crossly. Aye, 3 days of work, and for what? For nothing. I am behind now. The order will be late. Treat-ear had taken a few dragging steps out of the yard, but on hearing the old potter's mutterings, he lifted his head and turned towards him. Honorable potter, sir, could I not work for you as payment? Perhaps my help could save you some time? Min shook his head impatiently. What could you do, an untrained child? I have no time to teach you. You would be more trouble than help. Treat-ear stepped forward eagerly. You would not need to teach me as much as you think. I have been watching you for many months now. I know how you mix the clay and turn the wheel. Watched you make many things. The potter waved one hand and cut the boy's words spoke with derision. Turn the wheel? Ha! He thinks he can just sit there and make a pot. Just like that. Treat-ear crossed his arms stubbornly and did not look away. Min picked the rest of his box and set it, and tossed it too, on the rubbish heap. He muttered in his breath so Treat-ear could not hear the words. Min straightened up and glanced at the shelf, then at the wheel, and finally at Treat-ear. Yes, all right, he said, his voice still rough with an annoyance. Come tomorrow at daybreak, then. 3 days it took me to make that box, so you will give me 9 days' work in return. I could not even begin to think how much greater the value of my work is than yours, but we will set it on this for a start. Treat-ear bowed in agreement. He walked around the side of the house, then flew off down the road. He could hardly wait to tell Crane Man for the first time in his life he would have real work to do. Upon arriving the next day for work, Treat-ear learned that it was Min's turn to chop wood for the kiln fires. That was why he had not been at home the day before. Like most of the potter's village, Chelbo had a communal kiln set on the hillside just outside the center of the village. It looked like a long, low tunnel made of hardened clay. The potters took turns using the kiln and keeping up the supply of fuel. Min handed Treat-ear a small axe and led him around the side of the house to a wheeled cart. Fill the cart with wood, Min barked. Dry wood, not wet. Do not come back until the cart is full. Treat-ear felt as though the sun had suddenly dimmed. The night before, sleep had not come easily. He had imagined himself at the wheel, a beautiful pot growing from the clay before him. Perhaps he thought now, if he chopped enough wood quickly, there would still be time at the end of the day. Min quashed the hope with his next word. Take care to go well in the mountains. Far too many trees have been cut too close to the village. You will walk a long way before you find a plentiful stand of trees. Tree Ears swallowed a sigh as he placed the axe in the cart. Grasping with the two angels, he wheeled the cart onto the road. He turned to wave farewell, but the potter was no longer there. The sound of the throwing song floated out from behind the house. Chopping wood for hours without a single bite to eat had been hard enough. But the worst of that day was the long trip back down to the mountainside with the cart full of wood. The path was red and bumpy. The homey cart was poorly balanced, awkward with its heavy load. At every step, Tree Ear had to keep his eye trained on the path and the cart. In spite of his efforts, whenever the wheels hit a deep rut, the cart tipped precautiously and some of the logs spilled out. Then he had to stop and pick up the fallen wood. It was more than annoying because he had been careful to lay the wood neatly as he chopped, and each bump led to further disarray of the tidy path. After this had happened more than times than he could count, Tree Ear neared the end of the mountain path. Soon it would whiten and smooth out into more heavily traveled foothill roads. Tree Ears lifted his head for a moment in eager anticipation of the end of the day. Just then, the right-hand wheel caught a stone. The cart handles were wrenched from his hands, and the cart tipped onto his side. Momentum pulled Tree Ear off balance, and he tripped over the cart and tumbled headfirst into the ground. He sat up dazed. For a moment, he didn't know whether to curse or cry. He set his lips together tightly and scrambled to his feet, then pulled the cart upright and began flinging the wood back into a frenzy. As he heaved a large rough log on an arrow of pain shot through his right hand. He cried out and clenched it a fist for a moment until the throbbing eased a little. Then he opened it cautiously and examined the injury. The pillow of fluid that had formed on his hand had been long hours of wielding the axe had burst. Blood ran from the wound, mixing with dirt and small bits of bark. Tree Ear stared at it, and he could not stop the tears that had pressed hot behind his eye. Angrily, he blinked away the tears and set about tearing a strip of cloth from the bottom of his tunic. There was no water nearby, so he spat on his palm and wiped it as best as he could, clenching his teeth against the pain. He used his other hand and his teeth to wrap and tie the cloth into a makeshift band-aid. From then on, he worked slowly and methodically, stacking the wood in neat rows in the cart. The sun was low in the sky when he finished it at last and wheeled the cart cautiously down the path to the foothills road. Tree Ear dragged himself home to the bridge that evening. Cranman's normally placid expression was replaced with a frown of worry when Tree Ears stumbled into the space under the stairs and collapsed into a heap on the ground. Cranman said nothing. He merely held out a bowl in which he had placed a small mound of rice and a little pile of boiled greens. Too exhausted to eat, Tree Ear waved the food away, but Craneman hobbled to his side and used his crutch for support as he eased himself down to sit next to Tree Ear. Craneman picked up a little rice in his fingers and insistently, but still without a word, began feeding Tree Ear as if he was a baby. Tree Ear did not remember finishing the meal, but he awoke the next morning to see Craneman swing himself down the ridge by holding one of the stirrers, and he always did. Small and slight, and who knew how old Craneman still moved his upper body with the ease of a young man. Many were the times that Tree Ear forgot completely about the useless egg. Where had Craneman been so early? Tree Ear sat up stiffly and began to rub his eyes. As he brought his right hand up to his face, he caught sight of the crude band-aid. It was stiff with dry blood. "Yes, this is what I have been about," said Craneman. "Now let us see what we can see." Tree Ear held out his hand. Crane Man untied the bandage and began to unwrap it. Sst! Tree Ear hissed sharply in pain and snatched his hand away. The final layer of cloth clung stubbornly to the wound, and Crane Man had been trying to pull it off. Come now, my monkey friend, said Crane Man, kindly but firmly. It must be removed so that we can clean the wound. The demons of sickness are no doubt already scheming to enter your body through such a door. Tree Ear rose and shuffled to the water's edge. He crouched and dipped his hand in the water. Its coolness soothed the throb, and its wetness loosened the cloth grip on the wound. Wincing, he eased the band-aid away. While Tree Ear clenched his wound, Crane Man took the strip of cloth and washed it thoroughly with water from the gourd bowl, scrubbing it against a flat stone at the river's edge. Then he wrung it out and handed it to Tree Ear, who scrambled up the bank and hung it on a strut to dry in the sun. From his waist pouch, Crane Man took a handful of green herbs he had gathered in the woods earlier in the morning. He scooped them to a paste between two stones, then scooped up some of the paste with his 2 fingers and applied it to Tree Ear's hands. Close your hand, Crane Man ordered. Squeeze so the healing juices may enter the wound. The two friends ate the last of the rice treasure for breakfast, Tree Ear holding the paste as he ate with his other hand. Then Crane Man tied the now dry strip of cloth back into a bandage. There, he said, a few days' rest will see that hand is good as new. He looked at Tree Ear sternly. Tree Ear said nothing. He knew that Crane Man had already guessed there would be no rest that day. There was still 8 days of work to be done for men. That's it for today. Bye!